I see you getting attacked by BBC/UK Foreign Office propagandists because there's this attempt to revive the Douma deception. By the Douma deception, I refer to the staging of a chlorine attack in April 2018 by solidly defeated Syrian insurgents from the Army of Islam, Jaish al-Islam, the Saudi-backed faction in East Ghouta, east of Damascus. And now they're what AFP, BBC, they're all over this report. 2 Syrian doctors and a nurse told AFP, Agence France Presse, in a series of interviews that Bashar al-Assad's government coerced them into providing false testimony to international investigators after a deadly 2018 chlorine attack on Douma. And they state that there was just this chlorine attack, matter of factly. I actually haven't put that on the screen for whatever reason, but here it is. Here's the tweet from AFP's correspondent, Beirut Deputy Bureau Chief Lael Abu Rahal. So, Aaron, what is your response to the reviving of this Douma narrative?
Well, I knew this would happen. The Douma narrative is so important to the propaganda campaign to justify the Syria dirty war. And the revelations of a cover-up at the OPCW were so embarrassing, so explosive, that of course there was going to be an effort to shore up the initial narrative that Syria committed a chemical attack in Douma. The problem is, no matter how many people you bring forward to claim that they witnessed a chemical attack or that they were pressured into saying there was no chemical attack, it doesn't challenge the fundamental fact that the OPCW's scientific findings undermine the allegations of a chemical attack and that those findings were covered up. That's the thing that no one is contending with. The whistleblowers who challenge the cover-up, their case is not based on witness testimony. The original report from the OPCW's Douma team said that among the alleged witnesses, there are 2 very divergent narratives. People supplied by the government said there was no chemical attack. People supplied by the white helmets in Turkey said there was a chemical attack. And it just pointed this out, that there was this wild divergence and that was something they had to reconcile with further investigation. That's why in any investigation, you don't just rely on testimony from witnesses who could be biased or coerced. You rely on the physical and forensic evidence. And in the case of Douma, that physical forensic evidence was covered up. We know from all the leaks in the OPCW that NATO toxicologists said there's no way that this was chlorine gas that caused the foaming of the mouth in these victims. It had to be something else. That was covered up by the OPCW. We know that the levels of chlorinated organic compounds, that was presented as evidence of chlorine, but that key findings, including what the background levels were, that was suppressed. We know that the ballistics, whether or not the damage to the cylinders and the ceiling was believable and matched, we know that was covered up. All these areas of science, and also including forensic pathology, which could have helped determine how these people died, that was all suppressed. And so in any wartime situation, people are going to be biased, and there is the fear that they could be coerced. So even if these doctors have now come forward and said that the Syrian government pressured them to say there was no chemical attack, even if that's true, I'm going to assume it is, it doesn't change the fact that the science was censored. It's very well possible the Syrian government went to people and said, say this, or else you'll face consequences. But that doesn't mean the Syrian government committed a chemical attack. The way to determine that is to look at the science, and that science was suppressed. And note how you have not seen the German toxicologists who said there's no way that this was a chlorine attack. Have they changed their testimony? Have they changed their conclusions? No, they haven't. They've just been ignored. And that's why, to support this narrative, all these stories now about these new supposed witnesses, none of them mention the OPCW whistleblowers or the leaks. If they actually cared about what happened in Douma, they would say these OPCW whistleblowers challenged the cover-up of their investigation, but this is why they're wrong. They don't do that because they can't argue with the scientific findings that were censored, and they can't deny the fact that there was censorship. So you can, and this is why, if you read the reporting I've done, I've written at least 12 articles now based on the OPCW leaks. I never based my argument on the claims of alleged witnesses, even those that supported my narrative, because you can get witnesses to say anything you want. What you can't do is alter the science. and because that hasn't changed. That's based on hard, scientific principles. And in the case of Douma, that's what was covered up. So that's what's important to understand here about these new claims coming forward based on people who claim to be witnesses and now doctors. It's not surprising. And by the way, the logic works in both directions. Yes, of course, the Syrian government is very well capable of intimidating people. But you think now that in Syria, which is ruled by which is ruled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the former Al-Qaeda franchise, and where people like the leaders of Jaish al-Islam are being brought back into the fold, do you think that it's not possible to be coerced in that environment, or to be intimidated, or to be biased? There's all sorts of possibilities here that apply just as equally to witnesses that supported the narrative back in 2018 that there was no chemical attack. The same logic applies to those who are now presenting a different narrative. So that's why it's important to, if you care about looking at what happened in Douma, to look at the science. But nobody wants to do that because the science points to this being staged by the insurgents on the ground.
Where are the chemical weapons?
That's another great question. That's another question. So yeah, exactly. We were told that Syria, despite the fact that they destroyed and handed over their chemical weapons to the OPCW back in 2013, that they had kept a stockpile, and that permitted them to carry out more attacks like in Khan Sheikhoun and in Douma. They haven't been found yet. And that's a narrative inconvenience that, I don't know, could easily be taken care of by planting more chemical weapons. Who knows? But yeah, it's true. As of now, it's been a few weeks. They haven't found Syria's supposed remaining chemical stockpile, which is another inconvenience to the narrative that doesn't get acknowledged. There's one more thing too about Douma. Speaking of like missing evidence, this is the headline from right after Douma back in April 2018. Okay, and this was U.S. officials, and they said this: U.S. officials, blood samples show nerve agent and chlorine in the Syria gas attack. Two U.S. officials said they were confident in the intelligence, though not 100% sure. So back when the U.S. was trying to make the case that Syria committed a chemical attack and we have to bomb them because of it, they were saying back then that Syria committed a nerve agent or a chlorine attack, or both, right? And then they were saying back then they even have that they even have blood samples proving this. Well, where are those samples? What happened to those samples? Everyone's forgotten about them. The OPCW never got them because they're nowhere in any of the OPCW reports. And
that's that boy right there, by the way, not to interrupt for too long, but the boy in the green sweater, I believe, is named, it was one of the ones who testified later in Brussels that they'd basically just, the white helmets just started hosing him off to create the impression that he had been doused in chemicals and that he didn't know what was going on, but there was no chemical attack. I think his name was Omar Diab.
Yeah, that's what everyone said at the time. And of course, now they're going to say that all these people were coerced, that they didn't mean it. That's going to be the new narrative. But whatever the truth is there, you can't alter the science. And if, for example, these people were the victims of a chemical attack, how come their blood samples that the U.S. said they had and were confident in were never given to the OPCW? What happened was the OPCW did not find any evidence of nerve agents like sarin at the scene. And so therefore the narrative had to settle on chlorine. But the problem with that is, among many scientific findings, German toxicologists said this could not have been chlorine because the symptoms just did not match chlorine at all. That was their unequivocal conclusion. That was suppressed, and we never heard about these blood samples ever again. So these are the kind of questions, if you cared about what happened in Douma, we'd be asking. And now people who don't want to ask the proper questions, who want to ignore the censored scientific findings, who want to ignore the fact that the U.S. claimed they had nerve agent and chlorine detected in blood samples, but then never produced those samples, they want to ignore that and just focus now on the claims of people that now fit their narrative. But if you care about like a legitimate scientific investigation, it's not going to fly. The only legitimate investigation would entail reopening the Douma investigation and listening to the scientists whose findings were suppressed and weighing their suppressed findings. But that will never happen because they don't want to let that reach its obvious conclusion, which is that, in my opinion, this was staged by the insurgents on the ground.
We've seen so much. I mean, Syria has just been the staging ground for so much bogus propaganda. So many so much atrocity propaganda, staged incidents. It's been one of the most expensive psyops in history. And people have been intimidated, but many of those who've been intimidated were the inspectors who told the truth about the staging in Douma.
Yeah.
We have an email that we published from one of them who said that he couldn't go public because he was afraid of what would happen if he were walking down the street in
Yep.
a English city, that he would actually face the consequences from the MI6.
Yep.
And that
That
he,
person is not one of the two Douma whistleblowers that we know about. This was somebody else.
this
Another.
is a high level person though, who said that he was afraid for his own life
Yep.
because he knew the truth, which was that there was no chemical attack
Yep.
in Douma. We published that at the Grayzone. Then there's a BBC journalist who appears to have been intimidated, Riem Dalati, who said back in February 2019, after almost 6 months of investigations, I can prove without a doubt that the Douma hospital scene was staged. No fatalities occurred in the hospital. All the white helmets, activists, and people I spoke to are either in Idlib or Euphrates Shield areas. Only one person was in Damascus. Then he never said a word again after promising he could prove it. I wonder why.
Yeah, he never
I wonder.
released. Yeah. And then when the BBC did a podcast trying to denigrate the whistleblowers, it was by Chloe Hajimantayo. She declined to speak to her own BBC colleague, Riem Dalati. He didn't even appear in her own documentary because what he found undermined her narrative. But nobody's saying there, the people he spoke to were in Idlib. They weren't even in Damascus at that time, except for one person. So he's suggesting there that they were free to speak the truth. And he, according to his research, the Douma hospital scene was staged. And that's actually the only time I've ever relied on witness testimony was his, because he's a journalist who did an investigation, who spoke to people directly involved, and spoke to people who were in Idlib. So it's not as if they were living under like Syrian government coercion. And just think about this logically. First of all, just putting aside all the evidence, the OPCW cover up, just think about this logically. Why would Syria ever do the one thing, the only thing that they knew would invite U.S. military intervention? That's been the logical flaw in all these weapons allegations. That, like, as Charles Glass reported, veteran journalist, had a great article in Harper's Magazine a few years ago. He spoke to one former U.S. diplomat who said that Obama's red line, where Obama said the one thing that could get me to intervene in Syria is a chemical attack. This diplomat said the red line was an open invitation to a false flag because it incentivized insurgents to do the one thing that Obama said would prompt him to intervene militarily. And when Obama wouldn't intervene militarily, he did that after his own intelligence officials came to him and said, the evidence is not a slam dunk, which was a deliberate reference to the Iraq WMD scam. Trump came into office, and Trump, his big thing was showing how tough he was compared to Obama. So when there was another chemical weapons allegation, and this was, by the way, right after the Trump government, the Trump administration said they were going to like drop the whole regime change with Syria. Then Trump decided to bomb Syria and did it again. He did it twice, in Khan Sheikhoun in 2017, Douma 2018. So logically, why would Assad ever do the one thing they knew would invite U.S. military intervention? Why are these chemical attacks only ever dropped on civilians, not on insurgents taking government territory? Douma came at the end of an operation. This wasn't happening as like insurgents were taking territory. This came as the Syrian government was about to complete their recapture of territory. So, logically, even putting aside all the evidence, it never made sense. And applying that same logical thinking to the stage hospital scene, how many times do you have a chemical attack happen, and then the victims say, you know what, this is horrible, but just to make sure people believe us, we should simultaneously stage a hospital scene, just to make sure that everyone believes that all these dead bodies in front of us were actually killed by a chemical weapons attack. That's the logic if you follow Riem Dalati's reporting. If you think there was a chemical attack, but you listen to him based on speaking to people, then you have to believe that the rebels simultaneously suffered a chemical attack and decided to stage a hospital scene just to make sure everyone really believed them. It just
it doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't have to. And the BBC and AFP and the rest of them and their Western governments that control them are just pissing on our heads and telling us it's raining again and again. And we're just not going to be that stupid. Why are they trying to revive this now? I mean, Assad's in Moscow. He's gone. His wife is apparently dying of cancer. It's over. They got what they wanted. So why do we have to constantly hear about this now? It's, I guess, to justify what has been done. And also, maybe there's a ricochet effect to distract from the genocide in Gaza. But it's to justify the West's participation and involvement in this devious and destructive regime change operation, which may produce another civil war in Syria in the next year.
Yeah, and it's also because their credibility took such a huge hit with the
Yeah.
OPCW leaks.
Yeah, that's a
The
good
fact that
point.
whistleblowers who deployed on the ground in Syria, who conducted the investigation, were saying that their investigation was covered up. That was a huge embarrassment. And even though the media did a great job pretending it didn't exist, it was still very damning because enough people heard about it thanks to, in part, to outlets like ours, which made sure to stay on the story while everybody else was ignoring it. So that's very embarrassing. So they need everything. They're pulling out all the stops now to whitewash the OPCW cover up, and I'm pretty confident we have not seen the last of it. That we'll see more efforts
Definitely.
as things unfold.
Well, thank you again for your service on that, Lieutenant or General Buzzsaw.
Well, there's more to come. There's more to come. I've taken a break from the Douma story because I've been focused on other things. But now that it's back, there will be more to come in 2025.